My wife called marriage modern slavery and chose liberation. I watched freedom drain her cash and watched her modern slavery fantasy collapse hard. Modern slavery, that's what she called it. Not a partnership, not a commitment, not even a mistake. Modern slavery. It started about 6 months ago when she discovered some online community that apparently opened her eyes to how oppressed married women really are. Suddenly, everything I did became evidence of my tyrannical control over her life. Making coffee in the morning, I was reinforcing domestic expectations. Asking if she wanted to grab dinner together, I was monopolizing her time. Working extra hours to cover our mortgage, I was trapping her in a system designed to benefit only me. The first time she used those words, we were sitting on our couch watching TV after I'd spent the day fixing our leaky faucet and mowing the lawn. She looked at me with this newfound wisdom in her eyes and said, "You realize this whole setup is just modern slavery, right? I cook, I clean, I manage your social calendar. And for what? So you can feel like the man of the house?" I laughed, actually laughed because I thought she was joking. The woman who hadn't touched a lawnmower in 3 years, who considered loading the dishwasher her maximum contribution to household maintenance, was lecturing me about domestic slavery. But she wasn't joking. Her face told me she was dead serious. "I'm not your maid," she continued, warming up to her theme. "I'm not your secretary. I'm not here to make your life comfortable while mine gets smaller and smaller." Here's the thing about my wife, she's always been dramatic. But this was different. This wasn't her usual complaint about me leaving dishes in the sink or forgetting to pick up milk. This was a complete reframing of our entire relationship through some lens she'd picked up from whatever corner of the internet she'd been exploring. Over the next few weeks, every conversation somehow circled back to her liberation theory. If I suggested we visit my parents for the weekend, I was forcing her into unpaid emotional labor. If I mentioned that we were running low on groceries, I was assigning her domestic duties. If I worked late and came home tired, I was expecting her to be my personal restoration service. The breaking point came during a dinner party with our friends. We were hosting, and I'd spent the afternoon grilling while she put together a salad and arranged some store-bought appetizers. Nothing unusual, nothing we hadn't done dozens of times before. But as we sat around the table with 3 other couples, she decided to enlighten everyone about the true nature of marriage. "Marriage is just modern slavery with better marketing," she announced apropos of nothing. The table went silent. "Think about it," she continued. "Women are expected to provide domestic services, emotional support, and social coordination without any real compensation or recognition. It's unpaid labor disguised as love." Our friend's husband nearly choked on his beer. The wives exchanged those careful looks women give each other when someone's about to make things very uncomfortable for everyone. She wasn't done. Take tonight, for example. I spend hours planning this menu, shopping for ingredients, preparing food, and I'll spend tomorrow cleaning up. What does he do? Stands next to a grill for 30 minutes and gets praised for being such a helpful husband. I felt every eye at that table turn to me, waiting for my response. This was my moment to either defend myself or let her completely redefine our marriage in front of our social circle. But instead of getting defensive or embarrassed, something clicked into place, a clarity I hadn't felt in months. I set down my fork, looked directly at her, and smiled. Not a happy smile, a smile that said I understood exactly what game we were playing now. "You're absolutely right," I said. "Slavery is terrible. No one should have to live like that." She blinked, clearly not expecting agreement. The table remained silent. Everyone sensed that something significant was happening, but no one was sure what. "If that's how you see our marriage," I continued, my voice calm and measured, "then we definitely need to do something about that, because I would never want to keep anyone in slavery. That would make me a pretty terrible person, wouldn't it?" The room stayed quiet for another beat before someone changed the subject to the weather, but the damage was done. She'd drawn her line in the sand and I'd accepted her challenge. What she didn't realize was that freedom works both ways. If she wanted to be liberated from the terrible burden of being married to me, I was more than happy to help her achieve that liberation. After our guests left, I was cleaning up while she checked her phone. She seemed to sense that something had shifted. "You're being weird," she said, not looking up from her screen. "Just thinking about what you said tonight," I replied, loading plates into the dishwasher. "About slavery and freedom and all that. You made some interesting points." She finally looked at me then, and I could see a flicker of uncertainty in her eyes, like maybe she'd pushed something further than she'd intended. But it was too late for second thoughts. She'd opened this door, and I was going to walk right through it. The next morning, I woke up with perfect clarity about what needed to happen next. If my wife wanted freedom from the slavery of marriage, then freedom was exactly what she was going to get. The next few weeks were like watching someone methodically dismantle their own life while calling it progress. She took her liberation theory and ran with it full speed ahead, no looking back. It started with the cooking. Monday morning, I opened the fridge expecting to find my usual packed lunch, something she'd been doing for 2 years without complaint. Instead, I found a note taped to the milk carton. Free women don't pack lunches for their oppressors. Figure it out yourself. I laughed out loud, actually stood there in my kitchen at 6:30 in the morning, and laughed until my sides hurt because she thought this was punishment. She thought making me buy my own sandwich was going to break me down and make me beg her to come back to our old arrangement. That evening, I came home to find her sprawled on the couch with a glass of wine, still in her pajamas from the morning. The kitchen looked like a hurricane had hit it, dishes piled in the sink, coffee grounds scattered across the counter, an empty pizza box on the table. "How was your day?" I asked, genuinely curious to see how she'd explain this scene. "Liberating," she said without looking at me. "I spent the whole day doing exactly what I wanted to do instead of what society expects me to do. It feels amazing." "I can see that," I said, surveying the chaos. "Very amazing indeed." She missed the sarcasm completely. Over the next week, her liberation project expanded. She stopped doing laundry, hers or mine. She stopped grocery shopping, claiming that maintaining our food supply was domestic servitude. She even stopped basic cleaning, letting dishes pile up until we ran out of clean plates. But here's what fascinated me most. She kept spending money like nothing had changed. New clothes kept appearing in her closet. Expensive skincare products lined the bathroom counter. She'd order takeout for herself and leave me to figure out my own dinner, but somehow never worried about where the money was coming from. The real turning point came when she discovered this group called Wives Awakening. Every Thursday night, she'd disappear for 3 hours to attend their meetings, coming home energized and full of new revolutionary ideas about relationships. "Tonight we talked about emotional labor," she announced after one of these sessions, finding me reading in the living room. "Do you have any idea how much unpaid emotional work women do in relationships?" "Enlighten me," I said, not looking up from my book. "We manage the social calendar. We remember birthdays and anniversaries. We maintain relationships with both families. We provide comfort and support when men are stressed. We're basically unpaid therapists and personal assistants." I closed my book and gave her my full attention. "That sounds exhausting. How do you think we should fix that?" She blinked, clearly expecting an argument, not a question. "Well, women need to stop providing these services for free. We need to establish boundaries." "Makes perfect sense," I said. "You shouldn't have to do anything that feels like unpaid labor." Again, agreement where she expected resistance. I could see it confused her, but she pushed forward anyway. "Exactly. So I've decided to stop managing our social obligations. If you want to see your family or friends, you'll need to arrange it yourself. I'm not your secretary anymore." "Fair enough," I said, reopening my book. "I'll let my mom know she should call me directly from now on." That weekend, she put her new boundaries to the test. My sister called about a family barbecue, and instead of automatically saying we'd be there and handling the details like she used to, she handed me the phone. "Your family, your responsibility," she said. Sunday morning arrived, and I got dressed for the barbecue. She looked surprised when she saw me putting on shoes. "Where are you going?" "Family barbecue." "Remember the one you decided not to manage?" "But I thought we'd both skip it since I'm not handling the coordination anymore." "Why would I skip it? I can coordinate myself just fine. I've been doing it for 32 years. The look on her face was priceless, like it had never occurred to her that removing herself from the equation might just result in the equation solving itself without her. She stayed home that day, posting cryptic social media updates about choosing yourself and breaking free from expectations. Meanwhile, I had one of the best family gatherings in months. Without her constant subtle complaints about having to manage these events, I actually relaxed and enjoyed my relatives' company. My sister even commented on how much more laid back I seemed. When I got home that evening, she was waiting with what looked like a prepared speech. "I've been thinking," she began, "and I realize I need to take my liberation more seriously. Half measures aren't enough. If I'm going to break free from the slavery of traditional marriage, I need to go all the way." "What does that look like?" I asked, genuinely curious to see how far she was willing to take this. "I want to try a separation. Not divorce, just space." Time to discover who I am when I'm not defined by being someone's wife. There it was, the logical endpoint of her liberation journey. She wanted to have her cake and eat it too, maintain the financial security and social status of marriage, while experiencing the freedom of being single. I looked at her for a long moment, this woman who'd shared my bed for 4 years, who'd promised to build a life with me, who was now asking for permission to pretend our marriage didn't exist while keeping all the benefits. That's an interesting proposal, I said finally. Tell me more about how you see this working. She launched into what was clearly a rehearsed explanation about how they discuss this concept at Wives Awakening, trial separations where couples live together but maintain completely independent lives. No shared responsibilities, no shared activities, no expectations of partnership. It's like being roommates, she explained, but with the legal protections of marriage still in place. So you want all the freedom of being single with all the security of being married. It's not about security, she said quickly. It's about discovering my authentic self. I nodded slowly, as if seriously considering her proposal. You know what? I think you're right. You should definitely have the chance to discover who you really are. In fact, I'm going to help you get exactly the freedom you're looking for. The relief on her face was almost insulting, like she'd expected me to fight her on this, to beg her not to abandon our partnership. Instead, I was agreeing to give her everything she wanted. What she didn't realize was that freedom is a two-way street, and if she wanted to find out who she really was without the slavery of marriage, she was about to get a very thorough education. The conversation about our trial separation happened on a Tuesday night. By Wednesday morning, I had a plan that would have made Sun Tzu proud. She came downstairs around 10 o'clock. Her new liberated schedule apparently didn't include early mornings, and found me sitting at the kitchen table with a laptop, a legal pad, and what looked like serious paperwork. "What's all this?" she asked, pouring herself coffee from the pot I'd made hours earlier. "Just working out the details of your freedom project," I said without looking up. "If we're going to do this separation thing, we should probably establish some ground rules so there's no confusion." She sat down across from me, suddenly looking less confident than she had the night before. "What kind of rules?" I turned the laptop screen toward her. "Well, since you want to live like roommates with the legal protections of marriage, I figured we should formalize the arrangement, make it official." The document on the screen was titled Cohabitation Agreement, Independent Living Arrangement. I'd spent 3 hours that morning putting it together, and it was beautiful in its simplicity. "This outlines how we'll split everything," I continued. "Rent, utilities, groceries, internet, insurance premiums, all divided 50-50. Since we're not functioning as a married couple anymore, there's no reason for me to carry the financial burden of maintaining our lifestyle." Her coffee mug stopped halfway to her lips. "Financial burden?" she repeated weakly. "You know, the way married couples typically share resources. But since you want independence, you'll want to handle your own expenses. It's actually perfect. You'll have complete control over your money without having to answer to anyone." I slid a printed copy across the table. She scanned it with growing alarm. "According to this, I'd be paying $1,200 a month just for my half of the house expenses." "That's right. Plus your own car payment, insurance, phone bill, groceries, entertainment, clothing, all the normal adult expenses. Isn't it exciting? Total financial freedom." The color drained from her face as she did the math. Her part-time job at the boutique brought in maybe $1,500 a month after taxes. We'd never actually calculated what it cost to maintain the lifestyle she'd been enjoying. "But we're still married," she said weakly. "Legally, we're still a unit." "Exactly, which is why you get all the legal protections you mentioned. But day to day, you wanted to live as independent individuals, right? Well, independent individuals pay their own way." She stared at the paper like it might change if she looked hard enough. "This seems extreme." "Does it? Because last week you told me that expecting you to contribute to household management was slavery, and slavery is extreme. This way, you're completely free. No one expects anything from you, and you don't owe anyone anything." I pulled out another document. I also drafted a social independence clause. "Since you don't want to manage our social calendar anymore, we'll maintain completely separate social lives. You can hang out with whoever you want whenever you want without having to coordinate with me or consider my schedule." "What does that mean exactly?" "It means if you want to go out with friends, you go. If I want to have people over, I will. We're not each other's plus ones anymore. We're just two independent people who happen to live in the same house." The silence stretched between us. I could practically see her brain working, trying to figure out how this had gotten so complicated so fast. "There's one more thing," I said, pulling out the final document. "Since we're living independently, I think it makes sense to set up separate living spaces. I'll take the master bedroom and the attached bathroom. You can have the guest room and the hall bathroom." "Why do you get the master bedroom?" "Because I'm paying for the master bedroom. The mortgage is in my name. Remember, you're essentially renting space from me now, so you get renter-appropriate accommodations." Her hands were shaking slightly as she set down her coffee mug. "This isn't what I meant when I said I wanted space. Really. What did you mean?" I meant emotional space, time to think, freedom from expectations. And you're getting all of that. Complete emotional independence. No expectations whatsoever. You're free to think about whatever you want, pursue whatever interests you want, become whoever you want to become. Isn't that exactly what you asked for? She looked at the papers again, then back at me. For the first time in months, I saw uncertainty in her eyes instead of righteous conviction. "I need time to think about this." "Of course. Take all the time you need. But just so you know, I'm implementing the new arrangement starting Monday regardless. I've already moved my stuff to the guest room temporarily so you can have the weekend to decide where you want to set up your independent living space." That last part was a lie, but it served its purpose. The idea that I was moving forward with or without her input clearly rattled her. "You can't just decide this unilaterally." "Actually, I can. You wanted independence, and I'm giving it to you. The only decision you need to make is whether you want to be independent here or somewhere else." I closed the laptop and gathered up the papers. "I'm heading to the gym. When you're ready to discuss the details, just let me know. But like I said, the new arrangement starts Monday, whether we've discussed it or not." As I walked toward the door, I heard her call after me. "This isn't fair." I turned around and gave her the same calm smile I'd used at the dinner party. "Fair? You spent weeks telling me that our marriage was slavery, you wanted liberation. I'm giving you exactly what you asked for. How is that not fair?" She opened her mouth to respond, then closed it again. Because what could she say? That she wanted freedom but not the responsibility that comes with it. That she wanted independence but not the cost. That she wanted to be liberated from marriage while keeping all the benefits of being married. "I'll be back in a couple of hours," I said. "We can talk more then if you want." I left her sitting at that kitchen table with those papers spread out in front of her, finally getting a glimpse of what real freedom looked like, not the fantasy version she'd been sold by her liberation group, but the actual, practical, bills-need-to-be-paid reality of living as an independent adult. The best part was that I hadn't raised my voice, hadn't gotten angry, hadn't tried to talk her out of anything. I'd simply taken her stated desires and shown her what they looked like when implemented logically and completely. If she wanted to play games with our marriage, she was about to learn that I didn't just know the rules, I wrote them. Monday morning arrived like a reckoning. I woke up at 5:30, same as always. But instead of tiptoeing around to avoid waking her, I went about my routine normally. Coffee maker grinding, shower running, news playing at regular volume. Why should I accommodate someone who wasn't my partner anymore? She stumbled downstairs around 8, looking like she hadn't slept well. The weekend had clearly been rough on her. She'd spent Saturday locked in the guest room making phone calls, probably to her liberation group, looking for validation that I was being unreasonable. Sunday, she'd emerged just long enough to order takeout and glare at me while I meal prepped for the week. "So you're really doing this?" she said, staring at the stack of bills I'd left on the counter, with her name written on half of them. "We're doing this," I corrected. "This was your idea, remember? I'm just making sure it actually works." I handed her an envelope. "Your portion of this month's expenses. Since we're halfway through the month, I prorated everything. $600 for your half of the mortgage and utilities, plus I estimated about $200 for groceries you've consumed so far." She opened the envelope like it contained a bomb. $800? I can't afford $800. Then you might want to pick up some extra shifts at work, or find a roommate situation that's more within your budget. The suggestion hung in the air like a challenge. She could storm out and prove she was serious about independence, or she could admit that her liberation movement was just a fantasy she couldn't actually afford. "Is ridiculous," she said, but her voice lacked conviction. "We're married. You can't charge me rent in my own house." "It's not your house. It's my house that you live in, and as of this week you're living in it as an independent individual, which means you pay your own way like any other independent individual." I pulled out my phone and showed her a screenshot. I actually looked up what a furnished room goes for in our neighborhood. You're getting a deal at $600 a month. Her face went through about 5 different emotions in the span of 10 seconds. Anger, disbelief, panic, calculation, and finally something that looked almost like respect, like she was seeing me clearly for the first time in months. Where am I supposed to get $800? The same place any other adult gets money for their living expenses. Work, budget. Make choices about what you can and can't afford. I finished packing my lunch, something I'd gotten quite good at over the past few weeks, and grabbed my keys. I'm leaving for work now. When I get home tonight, I expect either payment or your alternative housing arrangements. Your choice. The drive to work felt like the first clear-headed morning I'd had in months. No tiptoeing around someone's mood, no wondering what criticism was waiting for me when I got home, no trying to figure out how to avoid the next lecture about my oppressive behavior. Around lunchtime, my phone buzzed with a text from her. "Can we talk when you get home?" I responded, "Sure. Have my money ready and we can talk about whatever you want." Passive-aggressive dots appeared and disappeared several times before she finally said, "This is insane." What's insane is spending weeks telling your husband that marriage is slavery and then being surprised when he offers you freedom from it. No response to that one. When I got home that evening, she was sitting at the kitchen table with a checkbook and a calculator, looking like someone who'd just discovered that rhetoric and reality are two very different things. "I wrote you a check," she said without looking up. "Great. What did you want to talk about?" She finally met my eyes, and I could see she'd been crying, but not the manipulative tears she'd used during previous arguments. These looked like the tears of someone who'd spent the day doing math and not liking the results. "I can't afford to live like this." Then you have 2 options. Make more money or spend less money. Both are completely within your control. Or, we could go back to how things were. I sat down across from her, the same position we'd been in when she demanded her liberation just a few days earlier. How things were when you called our marriage slavery. When you refused to contribute to our household. When you spent weeks disrespecting everything I did for us. I was figuring things out. And now you've figured them out. You've learned that independence costs money, that freedom comes with responsibility, and that calling your husband a slave owner has consequences. She looked down at the checkbook again. "I didn't mean it like that." "Yes, you did. You meant exactly that. You thought you could have all the benefits of being married with none of the obligations. You thought you could treat me like garbage and I'd just take it because that's what nice husbands do." The silence stretched between us. Outside, I could hear kids playing in the yard next door, normal life continuing, while we sat in the wreckage of what used to be our partnership. "What if I apologized?" she asked finally. "What would you be apologizing for? For saying those things? For being unfair? And would you mean it? Or would you just be saying it because independence turned out to be more expensive than you thought?" She didn't answer, which was an answer in itself. "Here's the thing," I said, standing up. "An apology might have meant something a month ago, but you've shown me who you really are when things get challenging. You've shown me how quickly you'll throw away 4 years of marriage for some fantasy about liberation. Why would I want to go back to that?" I picked up her check and tucked it into my wallet. "Thanks for the rent money. I'll see you around the house." As I walked away, I heard her whisper, "This isn't how it was supposed to go." She was right. It wasn't how it was supposed to go. It was supposed to go much better than this. 3 weeks into our new arrangement, I watched my wife discover what actual independence looked like, and it was beautiful in the most educational way possible. She'd picked up extra shifts at the boutique, working 6 days a week now, instead of her leisurely 3. The woman who used to complain about being tired after folding laundry was now coming home exhausted from standing on her feet for 8 hours, dealing with demanding customers and inventory management. Her wives' awakening meetings became a casualty of her new schedule. Turns out liberation groups are a luxury you can afford when someone else is paying your bills. When you're working evenings to make rent, Thursday night empowerment sessions become Thursday night shifts. The house stayed cleaner than it had in months because she was barely home to mess it up. I'd established a routine that worked perfectly for one person: meal prep on Sundays, laundry on Wednesday nights, bills paid automatically. The domestic harmony she'd spent so much time complaining about turned out to be pretty achievable when only one person was participating. Meanwhile, I was thriving. Without the constant undercurrent of criticism and resentment, I'd rediscovered parts of myself I'd forgotten existed. I started going to the gym regularly again. I called up old friends I'd lost touch with. I even signed up for a weekend woodworking class I'd been interested in for years. The transformation was apparently noticeable. My sister mentioned during our weekly call that I sounded happier. A CO worker asked if I'd lost weight. Even the barista at my usual coffee shop commented that I seemed more relaxed. The irony wasn't lost on me. My wife's quest for liberation had ended up liberating me instead. But the real revelation came on a Saturday morning in week 4. I was in the kitchen making breakfast when she came downstairs, still in pajamas despite it being nearly noon. She looked awful, tired, stressed, like someone carrying weight she wasn't used to bearing. "Can I ask you something?" she said, hovering in the doorway. "Sure." "How did you make it look so easy?" I turned around to face her. "Make what look easy?" "All of it. Working, paying bills, managing the house, dealing with everything. You made it look effortless." For a moment, I almost felt sorry for her. Almost. It wasn't effortless. It was just necessary, so I did it. "But you never complained. You never seemed stressed about money or exhausted from work." "I complained plenty. You just weren't listening because you were too busy explaining how oppressed you were." She winced at that, but didn't argue. "I had no idea how expensive everything was, because you never let me see it. You handled it. The grocery bill alone is ridiculous," she continued. "How do people afford to eat?" I almost laughed. People budget. They plan meals, shop sales, cook at home instead of ordering takeout every night. You know all those oppressive domestic activities you liberated yourself from. She leaned against the door frame, looking defeated. "I don't know how you did it all." "I didn't do it all. We were supposed to be doing it together, remember? That's how partnerships work. But you decided partnership was slavery, so here we are." The silence stretched between us. I could see her processing something, working up to saying whatever she'd really come down here to say. "I made a mistake," she said finally. "Which mistake?" "There were several. All of it. The whole liberation thing. Calling marriage slavery, treating you like you were the problem instead of appreciating what you brought to our relationship." I set down my coffee and gave her my full attention. "Go on." "I was angry about some things that had nothing to do with you, and I let those women convince me that you were the enemy, that our marriage was the problem, instead of just normal marriage stuff that people work through." "What kind of things?" She hesitated, then seemed to decide honesty was her only play. "I hated my job. I felt stuck and bored, and like my life wasn't going anywhere. But instead of dealing with that, it was easier to blame our relationship to make you the reason I felt trapped. Now we were getting somewhere real. And now?" I asked. "Now I realize that being independently miserable is still being miserable, but it's also expensive and lonely." I nodded slowly. "That's a start. But recognizing you made a mistake isn't the same as understanding why you made it or what you're going to do differently." "I know. I've been thinking about that a lot lately between work shifts and trying to budget for groceries and missing having someone to talk to about my day. Missing having someone to talk to or missing having someone to listen while you complained." The question hit her like a physical blow. I could see her realize that most of our recent conversations had been her venting while I absorbed her negativity without getting much support in return. "I want to fix this," she said quietly. "I want to fix us." "That's good to know." But wanting to fix something and being able to fix it are different things. I finished my breakfast and put the plate in the dishwasher. "You've shown me who you become when life gets challenging. You've shown me how quickly you'll burn down everything we built when someone tells you that your problems are my fault. Why should I believe that won't happen again the next time you're unhappy?" She didn't have an answer for that, which was progress. A month ago, she would have gotten defensive and turned the question back on me. "What would it take?" she asked instead. "For what? For you to believe I could be different, better?" I considered the question seriously, not because I was planning to take her back, but because she deserved an honest answer. "It would take time. It would take you proving that you can handle independence without falling apart or blaming other people for your choices. It would take you showing me that you value what I brought to our partnership instead of resenting it. And if you did all that, then we could talk about whether there's still something worth rebuilding. But that's a long way off, and it would require you actually wanting to be married to me, not just wanting to escape the consequences of not being married to me." I headed toward the door, then turned back. "In the meantime, your rent's due next week. And I think the experience of earning it is probably good for your character development." As I left her standing in that kitchen, I realized something had fundamentally shifted. For the first time since this whole mess started, she was asking the right questions instead of making demands. She was looking at her own behavior instead of blaming mine. Whether that would lead anywhere meaningful remained to be seen. But at least now she understood the actual cost of the freedom she had demanded so loudly. 2 months. That's how long it took for the woman who called marriage modern slavery to realize she'd been living in paradise and calling it prison. The breaking point came on a Thursday evening in October. I walked into the house after my woodworking class to find her crying at the kitchen table, surrounded by bills, bank statements, and what looked like job applications. "Rough day?" I asked, genuinely curious rather than sympathetic. She looked up with red-rimmed eyes. "I got fired from the boutique. They're cutting staff for the slow season. Last hired, first fired." She gestured helplessly at the papers spread across the table. "I don't know how I'm going to make rent next month." I poured myself a glass of water and leaned against the counter. "That's unfortunate. What's your plan?" "I don't have a plan. I've applied to 12 places in the past week and only heard back from 2. Neither of them pay enough to cover my expenses here. Sounds like you might need to consider other living arrangements." The words hung in the air like a challenge. This was it, the moment she'd either commit to her independence or admit that her liberation experiment had been an expensive mistake. "Is that what you want?" she asked quietly. "For me to move out?" "What I want is irrelevant. This is about what you can afford and what choices you're willing to make to maintain the lifestyle you've chosen." She stared at the bills for a long moment. "I can't afford this lifestyle. I never could. I was living in a fantasy where someone else handled the hard parts, and I got to complain about how unfair it was. That's accurate. I was wrong about everything, about marriage being slavery, about you being controlling, about deserving freedom without responsibility. I was completely, embarrassingly wrong." I set down my water glass. Being wrong isn't a character flaw. Staying wrong when you know better is. I want to come back not to the old arrangement, but to an actual partnership where I contribute instead of just consuming and complaining. "What does that look like to you?" She'd clearly thought about this. "It looks like me getting a real job, not just something to kill time. It looks like me handling my share of responsibilities without being asked. It looks like me appreciating what you do instead of taking it for granted. And when life gets stressful again, when I'm unhappy about something and need someone to blame, then I handle it like an adult, instead of burning down my marriage for validation from strangers." I walked over and sat across from her, the same position we'd been in so many times over the past few months. But this felt different. She looked different, humbler, more grounded, like someone who'd learned something real about herself. "I'm not the same person who walked out of here demanding liberation," she continued. "These past 2 months have been the hardest of my life, but also the most educational. I learned that independence without competence is just expensive loneliness. And what else did you learn? That I had a good man who loved me, provided for me, and supported my dreams, and I threw it away because some bitter women convinced me he was the enemy." She wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. "I learned that real partnership isn't slavery. It's the only thing that makes life manageable." I studied her face, looking for any trace of manipulation or self-pity. All I saw was exhaustion and genuine regret. "If I were to consider letting you back into this marriage, it wouldn't be as my dependent. It would be as my equal partner with equal responsibilities and equal accountability. I know. No more liberation groups. No more outside voices telling you how oppressed you are. No more treating our partnership like a burden instead of a blessing. I know. And if you ever call our marriage slavery again, I will hand you divorce papers the same day. Not as a threat, but as a promise." She nodded, tears flowing freely now. "I understand." I reached across the table and took the stack of bills, adding them to my own pile. "I'll cover this month while you find work, but this is the last time I clean up a mess you made by choosing pride over partnership. Thank you. Don't thank me yet. Prove to me that you deserve another chance. Show me that you've learned something worth learning from this experience." Over the next month, she did exactly that. She found a full-time job at a medical office, bringing home almost double what the boutique had paid. She took over grocery shopping and meal planning without being asked. She scheduled her own social activities and maintained her own friendships instead of expecting me to manage her emotional needs. Most importantly, she stopped taking our partnership for granted. When I fixed something around the house, she thanked me. When I handled a financial issue, she acknowledged it. When we spent time together, she seemed genuinely grateful for my company instead of resentful of my presence. The woman who came back to our marriage was fundamentally different from the one who'd left it, not because I'd changed her, but because reality had educated her in ways that no amount of talking ever could. 6 months later, we were hosting another dinner party. As we cleaned up afterward, one of our friends commented on how much happier we both seemed. "What's your secret?" she asked. My wife looked at me, then back at our friend. We learned the difference between partnership and slavery. And more importantly, we learned that freedom isn't the absence of responsibility. It's the ability to choose your responsibilities wisely. I smiled as I loaded the dishwasher. Sometimes you have to lose something to understand what it was worth. She nodded, drying the wine glasses carefully. And sometimes the best way to save a marriage is to let it end long enough for both people to remember why they wanted it in the first place. Our friend looked confused, but we understood perfectly. My wife had gotten exactly the liberation she demanded. And in the end, she'd chosen to use that freedom to come home.